How's it going, my friend? It is Ryan with the Creative Revolution podcast, and today we are doing Season 3, Episode 3, and I'm super excited to be interviewing my friend Sam Torode. He is an author, a publisher, and a musician, and we're going to be talking all about navigating uncharted waters in the midst of some pretty crazy times. I'm really looking forward to it, so stay tuned. We're about to get started. How's it going, everybody? It is Ryan Rhodes with the Creative Revolution podcast, and today I am super excited to be rebooting our podcast in the midst of what for a lot of us is kind of a pretty crazy time. So today, this is Season 3, Episode 3 of the Creative Revolution podcast. It's been a little while since I've done this, but I'm very happy to have here with me today author, publisher, and musician Sam Torode. Sam, thank you so much for being here today. How are you today, sir?
Great. Thanks, Ryan. It's good to meet you, and I know we have a lot in common, so it should be fun to talk.
Yes, absolutely. So Sam and I actually connected initially because I came across one of the books that he published a number of years ago. It's a book by Epictetus called The Manual. It's a book on Stoicism, and it's Sam has translated that into a much more modern version, and he also did the same with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Sam has published a number of different books, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But Sam, can you just share a little bit about who you are, what you are doing these days, and why you decided to start publishing those books in the first place?
Yeah, well, that's a broad question, so maybe I should start way back in childhood. I always loved reading books and going to the library. I still remember the smell of my hometown library and where everything was shelved, and the card catalog, of course. This was before computers, so
Absolutely.
we had to look everything up in the card catalog. And when I was 16, I tried writing and illustrating my first book, and about old-time baseball players. And I never got as far as submitting it to publishers. I did have, my dad worked for the schools, and he knew a woman who had published some books. So he gave it to her, and she sent me a helpful critique back. And so that was my first. And I actually, a couple of years ago, I dug that baseball book out and laid it out and published it just for the satisfaction of my 16-year-old self. So I'll show you. It's called Legends of the Early Days of Baseball.
Oh, very cool.
So a juvenile work, all the text written when I was 16 and the illustrations. But so that shows my love of books from a young age. And then in college, I studied both art and literature. And really working on the college literary magazine was where I got interested in publishing for the first time, editing other people's work and laying it all out. And this was in the mid-90s, so right when computer design was really coming into being. And when I first arrived at college, they were still pasting up things, for the school newspaper and photographing it, and rather than laying it out direct on computer. Right. So it was really the dawn of layout programs and being able to publish. And when I was in college, I drew cartoons for the school newspaper. And my senior year, I collected those and designed and self-published a book called The School of the Pathetic, of all the comics that had run in the school paper.
Oh, very cool.
So that was really my first foray into self-publishing. And I had a couple hundred copies printed up by a local newspaper printer, and then sent around postcards to everyone I knew trying to get them to buy a copy. So after college, I went to, my first job was with a company and I was hired to design a couple of journals and magazines that they were putting out. It was sort of a conservative think tank. Mm-hmm. And they had just started a publishing arm. right when I got there. So I volunteered and said, hey, I'd like to design these books in-house so you won't have to hire a freelancer. So they took me up on that. And that was my first experience laying out books. And with that, I basically looked at a lot of other books, what people were doing. I would measure the margins, look at how headers and footers were done. And so just teaching myself as I went along there, and found that I really enjoyed working on books in particular because it's something that lasts longer
Right.
than a magazine that comes out 1 month and no one sees it again.
Right. I actually, interesting story and very fascinating background on that, because I actually had a very similar experience growing up. Whenever computers first started showing up in people's homes, my mom was a public school teacher, and so we got access to the computer whenever she would bring it home, and so I started playing around with making my own mini books also, and making my own greeting cards and things like that. And my aunt and uncle had a print shop where they were creating all kinds of pamphlets and things of that sort. And so I was so fascinated by the creative process of taking something from a screen and then printing it out and then turning it into something that you can then hold and distribute. It was such a fascinating, it was almost like alchemy to me, just being able to create something out of nothing. And so that's super cool that you've had a kind of a similar experience in that realm. So in terms of your the kinds of books that you're publishing these days, I came across your work initially. Man, it was probably, I don't even remember when it was. It was a number of years ago. It was just the Epictetus book, and I have bought that and handed that out to a number of my friends. Some of them who are
Thanks.
probably watching. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
And Brent Metcalf is here. He says hello. And if you guys are watching, please just drop a comment and say hello so that I know that you're here. And if you have questions while we're talking about all this, and if you have specific questions about publishing or the creative process or anything else that we're talking about, go ahead and drop them below as we are live, and we will do our best to answer those. But in terms of the content of the Stoicism books that you have republished, I know that you're a big fan of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and you did a translation of his books and his writings called Everyday Emerson. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your introduction to those works, and how did you learn to navigate crisis in the first place, and how did that kind of bring you to Stoic philosophy?
Yeah. So to fast forward from where I left off, so I worked for one publisher, then left that job for a magazine design job, but kept doing the freelance book design. And this is in the early 2000s. And then in 2008, really, several things shifted for me. One was going through an unexpected divorce, and also my ideas were changing at that time. I mentioned I had worked for a conservative think tank and then a conservative religious magazine.
Okay.
So my ideas started shifting at that time, and which put me in a quandary because I didn't want to keep working on the same types of materials I'd been working on before.
Sure.
And then the third thing in 2008 was the financial crisis.
Oh yeah, that small thing that
Yeah.
seems very small compared to some things we're dealing with currently, but yeah.
Yeah. And then the publishing industry really started drying up at that time. The companies that I had been freelancing for dramatically reduced the number of books they were publishing. So my income dried up. And I had kept dabbling in previous years in self-publishing. In the about 2005 or so, I'd self-published some things. And at that time, self-publishing, you would literally order a print run of 1,000 or more books that had to be stocked in a warehouse
Right. So
somewhere.
you put it in a warehouse, and then either that warehouse ends up becoming your garage or your bedroom or something like that.
Yeah, I had enough books that it was a actual book warehouse company that rented space.
Nice.
And although one thing that happened with them, it caught on fire, and all
Oh
of my
no.
books were burned,
Oh no.
and they weren't insured.
Uh,
So
so that's actually, it's interesting you say that, because Melody here, she said she'd love to hear more about what made you choose the self-publishing path, and now having done it, if it had worked out the way you had hoped. So obviously, print on demand, your books don't exactly catch on fire.
right,
Yeah.
right. But at that time, 2005, there wasn't the print on demand technology,
Right.
and uh, and I had also published a couple of things with traditional publishers, and I knew, that their royalties were small, about 12%, and they didn't actually put that much into marketing or getting the things I was doing into bookstores. So I knew enough about that to think, well, I can do most of these things myself with self-publishing. But then it was really only about 2008 that self-publishing took off with the CreateSpace platform, which Amazon bought within a couple of years.
Right.
And that was the first time where a person could upload a book and publish it. It would be available on Amazon, and there was no cost
Right.
for any of that. So previously, you'd have to put forth a pretty big investment to self-publish a book. So with CreateSpace, there was no overhead, no risk. It was just a matter of designing your book and getting up. So it was so I was fortunate to catch that wave. That at the time my work with traditional book publishers was waning, then the opportunity to self-publish ramped up. And initially that meant public domain books.
Right.
I was taking a lot of public domain text, either having them scanned in to get the text or finding them online, and then laying out my own editions. So that's how I started with the self-publishing.
Okay. That's actually, and for those of you who don't know, that's public domain is basically whenever a book has been out for a certain amount of time. I believe it, correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, I think it's like 100 years? It's 50 or 100?
Yeah, it varies depending on the author and whether they renewed their work.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
So it's complicated.
Yeah. But basically
100 years to be safe.
Yeah, exactly. So so obviously there's a lot of works out there. Shakespeare is a prime example. These kind of timeless classics that have been around for a long time. That whenever they're in the public domain, it gives you the opportunity as a creator, as an author, an artist, or whatever, to be able to bring your own spin on it, whether it's an updated translation or a remix, as it were, of that work. And so another interesting kind of similarity with Sam and I's work is I had actually about a year and a half ago, I republished a book that is also in the public domain called The Science of Getting Rich by a guy named Wallace Wattles, which is a hilarious name. And this book is basically all about how to manifest and monetize your ideas. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the process of self-publishing and bringing your ideas to life and coming across works like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or some of these other works that you have republished, what was it about those particular things that really kind of spoke to you? Because obviously, as we're recording this, it's May 3rd, 2020. We're globally dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, and so much love and health to all of you out there who are dealing with some of this insanity. It's pretty crazy right now, but very similarly to how it was in 2008. A lot of the economics and the financial impact of so much of what's going on can really lend itself to making people feel uncertain and uneasy because really nothing is certain. And so, I have found that in the writings of Stoic philosophers and things of that sort, that there's such a predominant focus on the very small sphere of control that we all have, and that for me has been such a it has brought me a lot of peace in the midst of a lot of uncertainty. So can you talk a little bit about that, and talk about what it was that was in those works that kind of inspired you to put your own spin on it, and how they kind of helped you navigate the uncertainties of your own crises?
Yeah, so with the struggles that began for me in 2008, I read a lot. I went to the bookstore and basically skimmed everything on the self-help and psychology and philosophy shelves. And before that time, my mind, my realm of mind, and my thoughts and my imagination were always a pleasant escape, like daydreaming about creative projects and artwork and stuff was always a pleasant experience for me. Then when those crises hit, then my mind was full of negative thoughts and ruminating on what was going wrong. And so at that time I discovered the book by Epictetus, the Manual, and reading that helped me more than anything else I found at that time. Whereas, as you said, he says, focus on what you can control, what's in your control, and let go of everything else. So whatever other people are doing or thinking or saying, you have to let go of that. Focus on what you're doing and thinking and saying.
Right.
And that was really the first thing that brought me some relief and sense of hope. And then from Epictetus, I read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius and liked that even better. This was a Roman emperor who had a lot of stress and responsibility, and it was his personal journal where he's writing and reminding himself what he needs to do to accomplish his goals and stay focused. So that was an incredibly helpful book. And it was about 5 or 6 years later that I decided to put out my own version of rewriting it in my words. Partly I was very happy with the editions I had read, and I certainly didn't want to plagiarize them by having them fresh in my mind. So I waited a long time till I had forgotten it, and then found some public domain archaic translations, and then working from those, rewrote it in my own words. And it was a very helpful process for me.
Just kind of helped you process it more.
Yeah. And whatever I'm writing is really for myself. It helps me, I think, more than anyone else. It's not like as an author that I have it all together and I'm sharing wisdom. I'm learning and writing these things for myself.
Right.
And so, it was an opportunity where every day or so in the morning, I would work on a passage from Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, and writing that was a very good way to start the day. And at the time, I didn't think those books had that much sales potential, but they've actually done very well, probably certainly top 5 sellers of my works. So
actually on that
was a very good way to start the day.
On that note,
and at the time I didn't think those books had that much.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I'm having a bit of a technical difficulties here, so there's a little bit of a delay. I apologize for that. So in terms of the sales of that, I mean, at what point was it where, when you were doing the self-publishing, that you kind of had the thought, oh, okay, I can actually turn this into a business model for myself? Because I know for me, initially, I was like, oh, okay, I can publish this and, share it with some friends of mine and whatever. But then the more that I started exploring self-publishing, the more I realized, oh, I can create this as a source of income, as a stream of income that is 100% not dependent on the whims of the market. It's like I don't have to, get permission from a boss or an employer to create this. This is something that I'm creating of my own accord and bringing out into the world, assigning a value to it. And so what was it for you that whenever you were like, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty going on right now, but in the midst of it, choosing to create anyway. So can you talk a little bit about that process?
Right. First, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So there were at least 2 years, maybe 3, where my income from working for other publishers, magazines and such had declined substantially. And it was when I got the ability to self-publish public domain books through CreateSpace that really took off quickly. And within a few months, I knew that's what I would be doing. At that time, there was very little competition because it was right when this technology had opened up, and not many other people were doing these public domain books. I'll show you a couple of them. There's a Walden by Thoreau and Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. So I did concentrate on my favorite authors or works that I was familiar with, to things that I could do justice and make sure that the text was free of typos and such.
Right.
But so that business took off very quickly and worked well for several years. Then as competition, a lot of competition came in, and basically the market became flooded with very slipshod, quickly put together books that were full of typos and bad formatting, but they would get higher placement on the search engines. Amazon tends to favor whatever's newer.
Right.
And Amazon, they would also change their algorithms and rules as this was going on to try to minimize that. And at some point they decided, well, why don't we publish classic books? So Amazon published their own editions.
I'm shocked. I'm totally shocked. I'm not shocked at all.
So of course those are going to get top placement on Amazon when you search for that title.
I did see that apparently they're dealing with there's some litigation that has been thrown on the table about not just that with books, but with other things where they've basically used the data that successful people on their platform are using to create their own products, which again, it's not surprising, but it's also it certainly doesn't lend itself to ingratiate the idea of integrity and ethics in the business model. So
monopoly.
Yeah.
So I stopped just straight out publishing public domain books, I don't know, about somewhere around 2014, 15, and then started, how can I do my own unique thing, add my spin to it? So whether it's a unique collection of essays with an introduction by myself and all the material arranged by myself, or with the translations of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Tao Te Ching.
Right.
So so I would say that's the best thing to do now if you're interested in public domain books, is to put your own spin on it and do something unique as you did. So
yes, so that's basically for those who don't know what I did with the Science of Getting Rich book. I initially came across the book The Science of Getting Rich at the height of one of my own crises. I was dealing with a lot of financial difficulties at the time, was looking for work. I didn't know what to do, and for me, whenever I was in those kind of situations, I also would go to old bookstores and just kind of browse the self-help section and just, I'm desperate. I'm trying to figure something out, right? And so I had come across an old copy of the book, The Science of Getting Rich, and obviously at the time I needed money. And I saw that book and I immediately scoffed. I was like, this is ridiculous. This sounds stupid. Like, it made me want to just kind of throw it across the room. But it was 99 cents and I was like, I'm broke. I have literally nothing to lose here. And so I ended up reading through it. And to this day, a lot of the principles in it I found have been very, very helpful for navigating uncertainty, for bringing ideas to life and assigning a value to them. And so, what I ended up doing was going through, because I saw a lot of the same kind of situation where a lot of other people had republished the book, but, badly formatted, lots of typos and things of that sort. And it also was written in like the early 1900s and it sounded like it. So I went through and added my own translations to it, and then my own commentary, as well as resources for business owners, additional recommended reading, of which I believe I have your books in the recommended reading in there. I'll have to double check on that, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of a revelation for me, realizing, I can take these classics and add my own spin on it and make it more relevant for people who, care about what it is that I'm doing these days, that kind of thing. And so, it seems like that's similar to kind of the realm that you ended up going into. So,
yeah, and also I recommend people get to write their own new original material.
Absolutely.
Too, and put that out there. There were a few years when Amazon was incentivizing short books and people were throwing them together quickly and flooding the market with material just culled from the internet. How to do this, how to do that, and now the incentives have gone the other way, where it's more, if you really work hard on a book, put good material together, it has a better chance of being noticed and selling. So, and like you said before, it's passive income. Once you do the work, you put the book out there, it could be selling for years.
Right. So how many books do you currently have out on the market?
I haven't counted them, but things that I've written, somewhere between 10 and 20.
Okay.
I would guess, things that I've edited or written.
And so these days, is that kind of like one of your main sources of income? What does that look like? How has that changed over time?
Yeah, and that working on my books, that is my source of income. And I don't have a day job or anything else, which I'm lucky for that, and or blessed, as they say.
Sure.
That it's sort of what they say about it taking 10 years to be an overnight success, where it was work put in over years that eventually, as this wave of self-publishing came along, I was able to catch it. One interesting thing, I'll talk about Kindle some. We haven't talked about the
Sure.
ebooks in Kindle. And I was actually slow to get into Kindle because I love print books so much. But I had written a novel that I'd worked several years on around 2005 to 2007. I was hard at work on a novel, and that was really where I put my hopes that, okay, once I sell this to a publisher, then this new career will start of being a fiction writer. And it was rejected by over 100 publishers. From large to small.
My soul.
And then in 2010, beginning of 2010, Amazon had their second Amazon Breakthrough Novel competition. And I wanted to enter that. And the only way they would accept entries was if you published it on Kindle. It was only through the ebook format, because Kindle was new and they were also using that to promote the Kindle. And so I entered that book in this competition, and it started getting a lot of positive reviews and such from readers. Everyone who was in the competition were looking at each other's books, and posting comments. It was just an excerpt. It was about the first 2 or 3 chapters. And I made it up to the final round of I don't know, it was somewhere around 20 final books. And then they turned that over to Penguin Publishing to let them choose the winners. So I was back to being rejected by a publishing company
Oh man.
after. And what I noticed after that point, the books were still up, and I noticed mine was still attracting more reviews, more even than the people that the books that the publishing company had chosen. So I thought, well, I'll just publish the whole thing on Kindle.
Right.
And that was my first Kindle book, and that's The Dirty Parts of the Bible.
So yeah, so talk about that a little bit, because I know I've mentioned it to you, and for those of you who don't know, I also have a background in, we'll just say the ministry, Christian ministry, conservative space.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot more questions about those things these days for a variety of reasons, which I will not get into here. But in that, what's your fiction book about, and kind of what inspired you to write that?
I always tell people the flavor is kind of similar to "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." It's
Okay.
set in 1936, and it's a Baptist preacher's son whose father gets into trouble, loses his ministry, and the boy has to travel to Texas to try to recover some money that was stashed there long ago. So it's an adventure. It's got romance, but mainly comedy.
Very cool. And so you would so you published that. Help me with the timeline. When was that you published that?
2010.
Okay.
But I had written it a couple years before. As I said, I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
find a publisher. And
Right.
the time I was writing it is when my ideas and faith were changing. I'd grown up very conservative, so the character in the book is quite similar to that. And
Sure.
so yeah, it came out of my changing ideas. And I also worked in some of the stories I'd heard from my grandparents who grew up in Texas during the Great Depression. So
Okay.
that was always a favorite era of mine. So I poured that into the book.
Very cool.
And with Kindle at that time, it was near the beginning, and a lot of people started having success with these 99-cent novels on Kindle, and mine ended up being one of those, where it sold quite a few copies at 99 cents. And the traditional publishers at that time were resisting Kindle. They set all of their prices. I think it was $13.99.
Yeah, I remember that.
They were setting every Kindle book. So people were coming in with these 99-cent books and vastly outselling the major publishers. So that was an exciting time, and that has shifted over time, where now I sell more paperbacks than Kindle. So at least in my experience, the Kindle market has declined quite a bit.
Interesting.
And I don't know how to completely explain that. One of my theories is that when Amazon brought out the Kindle Fire, which has internet, music, everything else, I think people aren't reading a lot of books on those.
Right.
They're being distracted by surfing the internet.
Right.
So I think the Kindle kind of killed itself by adding internet access, and so now I think it's interesting. For a while there, it looked like ebooks were going to completely replace paperbacks, and now I think readers are mostly preferring paperbacks or hardcover.
I've definitely gone back. And it's interesting because it was right around that same time period. Because I have a Kindle. I have just the black and white one, and I very much enjoy it. I use it a lot, but I find that I forget what books are on it because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so I think I have like 100 plus or 200 some books on it, but all at various stages of completion. And so for me, when I'm reading through, and you can, I don't know how well you can see there, I will dog ear pages, and then I underline things that really stand out to me. And so I find that's, at least for me, that's how I process information better. And so I find it a lot better to kind of go back to the paperback. And so for a while I was mostly getting the Kindle books, and sometimes I'll still do that depending on, you know, what it is. But for the most part, I have kind of gravitated back to being able to have something that's not going to like I'm not going to be reading this Marcus Aurelius book and suddenly have an ad for a Jeep like drive out of the book. You know, I don't need an ad blocker to read a paperback book, at least not yet.
Right.
So
Yeah.
fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks these days on Audible, and I've recorded most of mine. My latest one I still have not got around to recording, because recording a book is not a fun process for me.
No.
It's a lot of painstaking editing. You know, when you mess up a sentence, you
mess up
back.
a sentence and you're like, you know, you sniffle or you cough or something, and then you have to go back and do it all over. People don't know what goes into these things, but that's part of it.
Yeah, so audiobooks have been a new thing in the past few years that have done well, and I think they'll continue to increase, where the ebooks may be decreasing, but audiobooks I think are going to go up.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on that. I have a good friend of mine that has been doing audiobooks as a business. Like people contact him to read it and produce it and that kind of thing, and he's definitely seen an uptick in it.
Right, and if you've written a book, you can go through Audible and find a narrator who will read it, and sometimes they'll just agree to split the royalties 50-50, and then you don't have to pay them anything up front. You know, depending on the project, you might have to pay some up front.
Question. So we do have a question that just came through from Melody. She said, "What are the best ways that you've discovered to market and gain readership?" And if you can't tell, she is an author. So
yeah, that's a great question. And for me, everything is on Amazon. I think, and in my experience, I found Amazon is its own world. So not many people, in my experience, see something on Facebook or Twitter or another website and then go over to Amazon and buy it. Mostly, I think of marketing directly on Amazon. So that starts first with the book title and the cover design, because that's what people are going to see first. So you have to have a title that will grab people and cover design that's eye-catching. Then the next marketing tool is the book description. So writing a good book description and using the tools in Author Central, where you can add your little author photo to Amazon. You can use those tools to add bold and italics that give your book description a more professional look. And then it's hoping that people like the book and review it, because reviews are the most powerful, I think, marketing tool, but you can't go out and get them. At least I know that there are some scam places where people buy reviews, but I wouldn't do that or recommend it.
Yeah, then it's like at the bottom of all of them, it's like, I received this book in exchange for my honest review. It's like I immediately discount everything that you said. And
so the other thing is pricing in terms of marketing. I'm a big believer in low prices so that people are willing to take a risk on something unknown. And so I price mine very low, and I know I've helped some other people self-publish their books, and it's very painful for them to price below, you know, a certain point. But I always recommend it and say, well, you can at least try it low and raise it if you want later.
Right.
So for me, $3.99 is my max for a Kindle book, and most of my paperbacks are around $7.99 or less. So I think it's a smaller royalty, but I think you'll sell more.
Right.
At a lower price point. And then with ebooks, there are free giveaways. I've found that's a helpful promotional tool, where you give it away free for a few days. And there are sites you can sign up with to help promote the giveaway, which makes it a lot more powerful. It doesn't do much without that. There's one called FreeBooksy that I've used, so freebooksy.com. And if you advertise with them, you're pretty much guaranteed to get 1,000 downloads of a free book. And so those are potential reviewers. And also when when that free giveaway goes away, it potentially boosts the visibility of the book on Amazon. It might show up more in different places. And then if you have that eye-catching cover and title, then there's a chance that people click on it.
So Sam, have you? I know for mine, I've done kind of not a whole lot, but I have done some advertising with Amazon's advertising platform where you can basically choose keywords and things like that. Have you done very much of that at all, or?
Yeah, a lot. So I'm glad you reminded me, so that I wouldn't forget that Amazon ads are the only ads I recommend. I wouldn't recommend buying ads on any other site, including BookBub is one of the bigger sites. I've tried buying ads there. It's not, you lose money on those, at least I do. But Amazon ads, you do have to watch it because the way they give you statistics, they'll show what you pay for your ads and then the sales, but they're showing you the gross sale of the book.
Right.
So you have to calculate what part of that's your royalty. And, some, you might be breaking even, and certainly some of mine are, but that's outweighed by other books that are making a better profit on Amazon ads. So I've found those are very effective and the only effective ads, I would say.
How do you have any tips? And this question is certainly selfish at some level because I have not been able to, like, I've sold some books with them, but the platform itself, especially for people who don't have a tech background, I know it can feel overwhelming. I do have a tech background and it still feels overwhelming. And so do you have any tips for things to do, things not to do whenever you're advertising on there?
Sure. And the bid you make per click, that price, a lot of mine, I'll even just bid as low as 10 cents per click, something very low. And my mind is kind of blanking out on the Amazon ads, but so there are automatic ads where Amazon's algorithms will automatically place it in different places on the site. And that's the easiest thing to set up. And I recommend doing that, but then also doing a separate ad that's a targeted ad for the same book where you look around Amazon, you type in or copy all the authors and book titles that are similar that you think people who like that book would like mine. Create a text document with a long list of those, as many as you can find, and then you paste that in as your targeted terms. And again, setting the price per click pretty low, at least at first, and see what happens. I've played around with that. I've bid as high as 25-30 cents a click on some books, and the cost of the ad then outweighs the profit. So then I'll lower them back down, always trying to find the best ratio.
Right. So a lot of it really just boils down to kind of trial and error and being willing to, recognize that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to be a self-published author and suddenly just get rich. But it is, you're, I would say, looking at it like you're planting seeds along the way and that eventually you do reap a harvest.
Right. And I would say things sell very little if you don't have any Amazon ads. At least in my experience, they're pretty much essential at this point.
So for somebody who's starting out, do you have like even just a ballpark that you would recommend mentally saying, okay, set aside X amount of dollars per month just to start collecting data and figure out what's working and what isn't?
I'd say at least $100 a month.
Okay.
Around $100's a good ad budget.
Okay.
Which I know that's pretty pricey, and it's unfortunate that back when Amazon didn't have ads, it wasn't necessary to have them. There were other.
Right.
It seemed there were other ways of being discovered. Where now it's suddenly a necessity.
Right.
To have ads, and my only worry would be what if it becomes an arms race where the price per click keeps raising until it's outrageous, like people. And I know even now, there are publishers paying $1 per click just to get theirs
Right.
listed at the top of all the ads, but that's kind of crazy.
Right. Hey, real quick, Sam. I don't know if there's a way to turn a light on or something. It got like
Yeah, I
cool.
see. I'm getting dark. Hang on.
And for those of you who are still watching, thank you for tuning in. If you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will do our best to get to those.
All right.
That works. It was weird how it like happened
Yeah.
really fast. I was like, wow, it got super dark.
Right. It was so sunny when I started here,
Right.
and now clouds have come.
Well, hey, we're
And
go ahead.
yeah, I was just thinking on the Amazon ads. I recently helped someone publish a book, self-publish their book, and help them set up the ads. And yeah, it ended up costing about $100 in the month, but I thought it was worth it to launch the book.
Mm-hmm.
It might sound like a lot, but just getting it out there, and I had them do a free giveaway at the beginning as well, and they had over 1,000 downloads because of a free Booksy ad.
Right.
And the free Booksy ads are only about $60 to $80 somewhere in there.
Very cool.
So that's for launching a book. That's what my recommendation is, to do a free giveaway on the Kindle version right away, and spend more on ads than you would like to.
Yeah.
On the Amazon ads.
Totally makes sense. So shifting gears here a little bit, just because we're almost at 2:00 already, which is crazy. But I do want to touch in, or kind of tap into a little bit of some of the content of your latest book, which is Living from the Soul. One of the things that you said in there was, happy is the artist or the laborer who finds satisfaction in the work itself. Are you successful? Look to your work alone for the answer, not to your press notices or bank account. Pour your whole self into your work and your work will shine. So especially with everything going on right now, I know for me, even the act of me doing this podcast right now is something that I wrestled with very deeply, because it's like, everyone is freaking out about this pandemic. People are trying to figure out what to do, what's true, what's not true. And I would say, at least for me, now more than ever, a lot of the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, a lot of that content has really helped me in just my day to day, because so much is uncertain, so much is feeling very chaotic, and it has helped remind me, hey, this is something you can control. This is something that you can create that's going to help people in your sphere of influence. It's going to help you with expressing your creativity. So for that quote, can you talk a little bit about, what does pouring yourself into your work look like when everything feels like it's falling apart?
Right. And I would say first, when the virus stuff hit, the first couple of weeks, I was just glued to the news, listening to it constantly and feeling down and just sort of listless, wandering around the house. Yep. So it's, that's to be expected. It takes a unique person to be nose to the grindstone during times of upheaval and uncertainty like that. But once I felt like I had a handle on, okay, listening to the news anymore at this point isn't going to help me.
Right.
There's, I sort of have a handle now on, okay, this is more dangerous than the flu, which I didn't know at first, and things like that. Then at a certain point, it's not going to help to keep mulling over these thoughts, keep those thoughts on repeat in your head. And, and then I found, doing your work, working on a project that's interesting and satisfying to you, that is the best thing. That is the best way to have peace of mind. And even if it's something that's not going to pay off immediately or might never pay off, it's as Emerson, another quote from Emerson is to put brick upon brick, just build and persevere. And through all times, good and bad, to just take one step to work on this project that's important to you, that's meaningful, and brings you a sense of personal satisfaction, whether it's creating some artwork or writing something, singing.
Well,
So
and you
just
have there's
yeah.
so much more time to. I guess the way that I've had to choose to look at it too is very similar to what you said. It's like the first few weeks, initially it was like, oh, this will just blow over, and it obviously didn't. And so then there was the kind of agonizing over the news and trying to figure everything out. I use that term very loosely because for those of you who are watching this on video, obviously I'm not sitting in a cartoon studio right now. I'm in a green screen room in my office, and I use this as an illustration to say that you can't really trust anything that you see on a screen. If you know how to frame a shot, if you know how to leverage media, you can craft any kind of narrative that you want. And I'm not into all the crazy conspiracies that are out there because, oh my God, there's a lot of them. But even with that, at the end of the day, you can't control it. And so I know for me that as a perfectionist, as kind of a control freak, I admit it, that's where the anxiety comes. That's where all of the kind of chaotic thoughts come from, is trying to control things or figure things out that, number one, I can't control, and number two, there's no way that I can prove one way or the other. But what I can do is focus very relentlessly on what's right in front of me. I can reach out to people who I care about more. I can be more intentional about working on my next book and my business and developing things that, like Sam said, might not bring an immediate return, but I know that if I continue with it, it's going to create a lasting legacy. And so, for you, if you are out there right now trying to figure out, how do I navigate this? What do I do next? The biggest suggestion I have, and I think Sam would echo this, is really ask yourself those hard questions. What are the things that you've been putting off that you've wanted to do but have made all these excuses for why you haven't done them? Whether you haven't had time, or you're not home enough. Well, chances are high you're home now more than you have been in a long time. And so it's a really good opportunity to write that book, to learn that instrument, to, start that business, start that nonprofit. I started my first business right at the height of the recession of 2008. I was working 3 or 4 jobs just to try and survive, and I watched my company lay off about 75% of their employees. I received a promotion, I use that term very loosely, and moved to the New York City area at the time. And I was making like $12 an hour, and it didn't take me very long to realize that was not enough money to live off of. So I had to start asking myself, how can I create something that is going to create an income for me that's not dependent on an employer? I wouldn't have even had those thoughts if it wasn't for those crises. So, wherever you're at right now, I hope that you're doing well. But don't waste the opportunity now to, slow down and think about what is it that you really want to create in the world. And that's really what this show is all about, is how do you bring something out of you that otherwise wouldn't exist, and really do the hard work of asking those questions. Sam,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would say everything is a part of your development too. For instance, I felt creatively blocked for a long time, even from say 2008 to 2014. I felt like I wasn't working on my own material. I wasn't doing, I felt like I had no creativity, and I was only working on other people's projects or the public domain books, that sort of thing. But looking back during those years, I was at least working on those books and exercising creativity in terms of the design and layout and such. So I was doing more than it felt like at the time. Like it felt miserable, and it felt miserable in a lot of ways at the time. And then looking back, I think, wow, I'm grateful that I at least kept taking steps and doing what I could. And then that builds up, and the things you think about during those fallow periods where you feel blocked, all that stuff is building up. And then eventually you reach the point where it overflows into a new creative project.
Absolutely. And that's really, I don't know about for you, Sam, but for me, it is very, very rare. I covet the times that it happens, but it's very, very rare that I, quote unquote, feel creative,
Right.
or even feel inspired to, put pen to paper or put my fingers on the keys and start working on that book. It's like, I know I can have a tendency to do everything but the work of creativity. I can, it's like, oh, well, maybe I should do the dishes, or maybe I should organize my office, or, all these other things that ultimately is just a kind of glorified form of procrastinating. And so, for you, do you have like any daily practices that help you stay focused and stay creative even in the midst of kind of crisis situations or things of that sort?
Well, I'm definitely an expert on procrastination. So I've had long periods where I felt like I was procrastinating on things, but one quote that has stuck with me is Ray Bradbury said he doesn't believe in writer's block. If you feel blocked, it's just that you're not really passionate about what you're trying to do. So find the thing that you're passionate about. So that's one thing that has stuck with me, is to find what I'm really interested in, because sometimes it's not what I think I should be doing or want to be. The thing I think, like writing another novel. A lot of people ask me when I'm going to write another novel, and it seems like that would be a great important thing to do. But then when I really think about it, it's just not where my interests have been lately. Like, I'm not reading a lot of novels. I mostly read nonfiction these days, and so my passion is actually elsewhere, and that's what I should be working on. The other part of procrastination is perfectionism, which is a big problem for me, and I think I've gotten better at it, where putting things out there before you feel it's 100%. It's certainly good to edit, check for typos and all that, but not to be perfectionistic, or it can just freeze you, and you end up not even starting when you go into something with perfectionism.
Well, the cool thing about it too is, especially if you're self-publishing, you have the opportunity, and not even just in writing, but with so much nowadays, if you do find a typo, you can fix it, re-upload it to your publisher, to your Amazon account or whatever, if you're writing a book, and then the next time someone buys it, the problem is fixed. And so, that's not.
You saved me there. You pointed out a typo on one of my book, on the back cover even. So that there's always another typo to be found, and it's certainly a great thing to be able to correct them right away.
Right. And it's basically, procrastination, and my first book that I published was, it's called Stop Wasting Time and Burning Money: How to Crush Procrastination and Live the Life of Your Dreams. I wrote and published that in the midst of probably one of the most challenging times in my life. I had to suddenly move out of my house in San Jose, and I had to find a car. I had to find a place to live, and I was broke. And so it was really kind of a crazy situation, but kind of like you said earlier in the show, I write for me. I write to help hear myself think. And a lot of the stuff that I design, that I publish, I do it so that it helps me process kind of where I'm at. And on occasion, I write things that I'm like, oh, this will probably help somebody else, and so then I end up publishing it as a blog post or putting it in a book or something like that. And
I realized I missed your question on the daily practices.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Because that's how I navigate procrastination. I try to create practices that basically eliminate the need to feel like I have to, have motivation or inspiration to do something. So what does that look like for you?
That's great. I'd say one is starting off the morning, I make some coffee and then sit and meditate for a while. And I'm not trying for the completely blank mind, that sort of thing. I just sit listening to meditative music on headphones. And I find a lot of ideas will start popping into my head at that time. So I'm not, fighting off every thought. It's just a matter of calming down and listening and see what comes up. And I find a lot of ideas come into my mind that way through meditating for 10, 15 minutes. And other things, I tend to get on a streak of something and then fall off. But things like exercising, some everyday walking outside in nature is usually a great thing for getting ideas. And, I've done practices in the past, like writing affirmations or writing a life vision or a vision of what your perfect day would be, and then reading that every day for a while. So those are very helpful practices that I'm not doing right now, but that I have done.
Right. Yeah, and I have very similar ones. For me, I know it's like I have almost like a mantra that has been very helpful. I think I heard it first from Tim Ferriss, but the phrase is "make before you manage," and that has been really helpful for me, especially navigating all the different nuances of running different businesses and the different work that I do. There's always another email to answer. There's always some kind of to-do list that is just stacking up, and I find that it doesn't matter what's going on in the world outside, if I don't do something creative before I start diving into checking my inboxes, like all 37
Right.
of them, because of Facebook, all the different social media, LinkedIn, my email, all that stuff. If I don't create before I start managing all of that information, it can end up being like halfway through the day and I feel like I've got nothing done except just react to other people's agendas.
Yeah, that's great. That's very important. 'Cause if you look at Twitter, your whole day's shot from
Yeah.
then on.
Yeah, Twitter is a pandemic all by itself.
I still look at it too much, but
Yeah, it's well because it really does boil down to especially if we're talking about the topic of the show, navigating uncharted waters. It really boils down to where are you steering your ship, and how are you steering it? Are you steering your ship, the ship of your life that you're driving? Are you steering that constantly in reaction to everything else outside, or is there some kind of internal guidepost or goal that you are striving after? And it's really easy to get distracted, and I'm right up there with you. But it's knowing that and recognizing it's a practice, that it's not a feeling. The feeling comes later, at least for me. And so that's kind of how I navigate that space. Well, we are pretty much at about over an hour at this point, so I really appreciate your time here. Is there anything else that's kind of on your mind? I do have one more question. Was if you had what do you think was like your biggest lesson, or what is some advice that you wish that you had taken to heart sooner, as it pertains to navigating the uncertainty of this bizarre existence? Small, just a quick 120 character answer is fine. I'm just kidding.
that's a big one. I don't know what I can come up with off the top of my head. I think I would tell my younger self that everything eventually works out. So don't be so fearful. Don't worry so much, because that's, worrying, like we said, worrying about things outside your control. That's taking up your mental space and wasting your time.
Right.
So
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me see here. Just want to make sure I had everything. I think those are all the questions that I had. So unless those of you who are watching have any additional questions, you have about a minute or so, you can drop those in and I'll see them. So Sam, where can people find you?
I'm impressed by the way that we actually got some questions and people tuning in. That's great.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm navigating some of the interesting tech nuances of Facebook changing some things. So if I did miss your question, it's because on the back end here, I clicked something and Facebook's no longer showing me some of the comments and questions. So I might have missed some. So if I did, I apologize. Um,
I
but
know I don't have a great deal of Facebook followers, so these are your people, which is great to see. I'm sure I did have a couple friends say they were gonna tune in. So.
Well, and the nice thing too is that once this is all said and done, I'll be able to I'll strip the audio out and put it out on iTunes and all the different podcasting platforms, as well as I'll have the YouTube video available on YouTube, and the replay will be available on Facebook as well.
Great. And that brings to mind another point for authors is I hear from a lot of people who think that they need a big social media platform in order to have success writing books. And I would say, if you love doing social media, interacting with people there, then sure, go ahead and do that. But it's certainly not a necessity.
Right.
And again, because I think Amazon is its own world, getting noticed on Amazon and marketing through your book's quality and content, that's better than trying to drive traffic through social media.
Well, and the thing about social media too is for any of us who have been doing this for a while know very well, you have zero control over. So if we're talking about stoicism, like you have no control whatsoever over social media algorithms. I mean, I remember I was doing online content, probably 8 to 10 years ago, and like 75% of the people who were on my page would see everything I would post. Now that percentage is like less than a fraction of 1%,
right?
Unless you put money in the Facebook machine. And so the best thing you can do, at least still in my opinion, is work on building your own platform, creating your own content, and leverage these other platforms, show up and post your content there. But the moment they change something, like don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't depend on those things, because I remember MySpace going belly up. I remember AOL going belly up. Like, it's just a matter of time with all of these things. So create your own content, create your own products and services and things, and build your own email list, because as soon as someone decides to change someone or something with these big tech platforms, then you can lose all of that just like that.
Yeah. Good advice.
Yeah. I only have that advice because I've suffered the repercussions of not doing it. So, that all said, guys, I really appreciate everybody watching. Sam, I really appreciate your time. How can people find you? I do have your link here on the video, amazon.com/author/Sam Torode. But is there anything else that you're working on that you'd like to share that people can check you out? Or
the Amazon author page is the best link. I have a page on Facebook at facebook.com/Sam Torode books. And if most of my books have my email address in them, I always love hearing from readers and interacting with people personally on email. So
very cool.
That's it. I've got a few things in the works right now.
Anything you can share?
I've been working for a long while on trying to turn the novel, The Dirty Parts of the Bible, into a graphic novel. So creating a comic book adaptation. It's a very slow going process. So
very cool.
And yeah.
Okay. I'm excited for that. I'm a big graphic novel nerd myself. So
great.
Okay, guys. Well, that's pretty much our show. I'm gonna go through a few things here real quick. Something new for me here. If you are interested in supporting this show, I did set up a Patreon page. I have a friend of mine who is doing very, very well on Patreon, and am kind of in an interesting transition right now with my own life, my business, where I'm wanting to be focusing more on doing content like this and creating the podcast as well as our online store. And so if you are interested in supporting the work that we're doing with the podcast, and you're watching the video here, you can see the link below Sam on the video. You can go to patreon.com/RyanJRhodes, and even a couple bucks a month, it really makes a big difference, and it helps me know that you guys care about this stuff and helps me keep making it, because there's a lot that goes into it. So that's that. Also, if you are interested in checking out the latest book that I've published, it's called The Science of Getting Rich, How to Manifest and Monetize Your Ideas. You can get that at scienceofgettingrich.info, as well as if you stop by rdshop.biz, you can get 10% off your entire order with coupon code CRP. We've got our own line of products and hoodies and wall art and all kinds of cool stuff over there that we're going to be rolling out more of that here in the near future. So other than that, Sam, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
That's it. It's been great meeting you and talking with you, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Sam. Hang on here. I'm gonna wrap up the show, and we can chat after we go off the air. So, thanks so much for everybody tuning in. Again, my name is Ryan J. Rhodes, and you've been tuned into the Creative Revolution podcast. Thanks again to Sam Torode. Make sure to check out his work. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep creating and inspiring on purpose. Talk to you later.